Hi guys, so I have a shelf on my Goodreads account called Put Down for the Time Being. When I started using this shelf years ago, it seemed like the best plan because sometimes I'd maybe read 50 pages of a book and then decide I was more interested in something else, and it meant it wasn't sitting on my currently reading shelf, deceiving the world as I wasn't actually currently reading it. But as time has gone on, things have sat on that shelf for months, if not years. And I thought today I might go through with you the books that are on that shelf and talk about whether I really intend on going back and actually finishing them at any point, or if you and I just need to accept that I have effectively DNF'd these books and they should be deleted from that shelf. I am absolutely and wholeheartedly for DNFing books, which has become a bit of a verb here on BookTube, and essentially means that you didn't finish a book and don't intend on finishing a book, which I think, great, don't waste your time with stuff you are not enjoying or getting anything from. But even still, I'm sometimes in denial about whether I have DNF'd a book or not. So let's have a look at the books, shall we? So first up we have The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. Now, I don't even think it's really fair to say that I've put this book down because I barely got into it. So I also don't think I can say I have decided not to finish it because I maybe read 50 pages and it's a huge book, and then decided I wasn't at a place that I had time to read a huge fantasy book. So I just decided I would go back to it another day. But if I do go back to it, I'm really going to have to start it from the beginning. And I do intend to go back to it because it has amazing reviews, my dad loves it and I trust him, and it also, from the first few pages I did read, was really enjoying it. It just wasn't for that time. But I also don't think I can fairly say I've started it because I've read so little of it compared to how much there is. A similar thing goes for Changeless, which is the second in the Parasol Protectorate series by Gil Carragher. This one I actually started on audiobook and maybe listened to half an hour of straight after I'd listened to the first book in the series, which is Soulless. I loved Soulless and thought that immediately afterwards I was in the mood to continue with the series, but I actually felt like a change, so half an hour in decided to swap to another audiobook, and have honestly forgotten that I even had the audiobook of Changeless, so haven't gone back to it, but that might be something I listen to this month. Again though, I listened to so little of it, I don't know if I've put it down for the time being or just never really started it properly. More interestingly is the next one, which is Donut by Tom Holt. This again I was listening to an audiobook and got well past halfway. I'm maybe 60% of the way through the audiobook or more even, and I kept powering through this one because there are moments of laughter. Tom Holt writes comedic science fiction fantasy-esque stories, and I loved his J.W.W. Wells series, especially the first one, The Portable Door, one of my favourite books of last year. And I had high hopes for Donut, but it just was not living up to them. It was so confused and the plot line really wasn't there in the way that the plot was there in the other series. Although they're not massively plot-driven books, they're more about the laughs, which I'm okay with. There was enough plot to keep you interested, where in this it just, completely lost me and I had no idea what was going on, and it wasn't engaging as a plot, even if there was the occasional joke that made me laugh. It's funny because with an audiobook I'm maybe more inclined to go back and listen to it because you can just squeeze it in moments where you wouldn't necessarily be reading otherwise, but I can safely say if it was on a physical book I would count this as a DNF. There is a chance that I'll go back and finish listening to it just because it is an audiobook. Oh, and now the controversial one. It's Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. I read, I'm forgetting now, but not quite 50% of this, maybe 25-30% of this, and just could not compel myself to keep reading. I wasn't a massive fan of what I did read. I enjoyed the experience of going back and seeing some characters who I absolutely adore, but I wasn't necessarily in love with the way they were being portrayed or the way the book was reading, which of course is a play, so it is probably more effective to see it performed, but that doesn't mean there isn't some sense of enjoyment you can get from reading a play. And it just wasn't happening for me. I did start reading it on midnight, the night it was released on my Kindle, and I sped through that first bit but then went to sleep and by the morning just didn't want to keep reading. I think as well the hype surrounding it and the discussion, good and bad, all over the internet, I found very off-putting because it was really difficult to separate that from my reading experience, which is so different from reading the originals where you didn't have that. I might go back and read it one day, but I don't think it will be anytime soon. I think it needs to be in the distant future when I'm not as close to it and people aren't talking about it as much, to be honest. We then have The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. Now, I was really enjoying this book when I was reading it. This is a Gothic novel, one of the Gothic novels referenced frequently in Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, and this is why I started it. I started it as a buddy read with Alicia and Tanya, whose channels I'll link down below. They both managed to finish it, even though I started it first and was really enjoying it at first and getting through it, although it's a huge book. I then don't know what it was, if it was just my year got really busy because we started reading it around Christmas time and then January was hectic. I just never got anywhere with it. It's a huge book and in terms of size not a lot happened in what I read because I read quite a lot and not that much happened, if that makes sense. So it's not super fast paced because of the size, even though a lot happens in the actual story. And in that sense I think if it's a book you put down, there's not a lot that compels you to go back to it because of that slight slowness. I would like to one day read some Anne Radcliffe. So I'm not sure whether I've DNF'd The Mysteries of Udolpho or not, which could very well be the case for a lot of these books, but I think it's fair to say I'm not going to pick it up anytime soon. I know my dad actually DNF'd it about 80% of the way in because he just got so bored that he just couldn't be bothered spending his time in the last 20%, which is a bit unfortunate. The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, interesting one. In my head I'm going to go back to this, but I was actually finding what I read of that one quite boring, and it was well over a year ago I started it. I read the first like 70 pages really quickly, it's not a long book, and then even though I didn't have much left to read, I got distracted by other things and never went back to it. But I think what's obvious from a lot of these books is there's just nothing compelling me to pick it back up. Kiss Kiss by Roald Dahl. This is one of Roald Dahl's adult short story collections, and this is a more interesting one because the reason I put this on my put down for the time being shelf is because I had it out of the library. It had to go back to the library and then I never went to go get it back to finish it. So in a way I think I kind of have DNF'd it, but in a different way because it is a short story collection. This isn't necessarily a DNF because I didn't like it. I was really enjoying it. I really enjoyed the short stories I did read, but I don't feel like I need to go and find myself a copy to finish it because it doesn't make much difference in my head whether I finish the book or not because I enjoyed the stories I did read, and I think it was more than 50% of them. I would have no idea where I left off now if I did pick up the book because this is over 2 years ago, to be honest. I put this on my put down for the time being shelf. But yeah, I do want to read more of Roald Dahl's adult stuff, but I'll probably just start somewhere else. And those were some fun short stories at the time. And it doesn't really make any difference to me if I ever read the final few stories in that one collection, to be honest. We then have The Tin Drum by Gunter Grass, and this and the next one are very similar cases in which I've started them multiple times and it's just never been the right time, but I will read them, I will. Everyone says amazing things about The Tin Drum. I really liked the 50 pages I read of it. It's one of my dad's favourites, but it's a huge book and his copy had minuscule, tiny little print. I might just need to get my own copy of it in a slightly more recent edition with a slightly less eye-straining print inside because that edition just wasn't working for me. This is a German classic and I do really want to read it. I just think, again, I'll have to start that one from the beginning, so it's not really a put down for the time being, it's a not really reading at all, need to start again book. Much like The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Started this a couple of times, read different bits of it a couple of times because Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron is a piece of medieval literature where all of the characters are telling one another stories. So in that sense, it's almost like a collection of crude, comedic, lewd short stories, and it is massive. I think a lot of editions are around 1,000 pages, and I just never read books that long. And I think it becomes easier to read long books once you're used to reading long books. but I read so many short books these days, it's hard to commit to such a long book, and I know that's just something I need to work on and force myself to do, because I'm sure I'll be grateful that I did if I power through. But I think if I ever intend to read this book as a whole, I will have to start it again and go right to the end. A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. So this is the first one I think I'm gonna say I've DNF'd. I started reading this one, read about 100 pages, wasn't really loving it. I was expecting a proper fantasy novel with proper fantastical dragons, whereas the dragons in this story are more like oversized lizards, and it's actually a story about a lady scientist in the 1800s, which in itself is another really good concept, but I went into it in completely the wrong frame of mind, did not want that kind of story, whereas I think lots of other people would love that kind of story and this would be a great book for them, just not those in search of proper dragon fantasy. So I put it down after 100 pages. I then went back to it and read like another 30 pages, and still the plot just wasn't doing it for me. And I know tons of people love this story, but I think I still had another about 100 pages to the end, and there are so many books out there that I want to read that, to be honest, I don't know, I doubt I'm ever going to go back and read those 100 pages. Nothing about the first half of the book did it for me, unfortunately. So I think it would just be a case of me forcing myself to finish a book I wasn't really enjoying, which doesn't really do anything for anybody, does it? It wastes my time, and I've told you already that I find the book kind of boring, so there's my review, sorry. The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. Oh, I'd forgotten about this book, to be honest. I started reading this one as a buddy read as well, and it's such a fascinating novel. It's set in a world where Germany and Japan won World War II, so the world is a very different place from what it is today, and it's set in America and follows a few different characters. It has inspired so much science fiction since its day. I can see a lot of reminiscence in the graphic novel series Saga of The Man in the High Castle, and in that respect it is like a pivotal science fiction work, but there's very little plot, and for me that's what it needed to keep me going. Whenever I was reading it, I was enjoying it, and I found it really fascinating, so interesting and so well written, but because there wasn't a plot or characters I really cared about, every time I put it down, nothing ever drew me back to it, if that makes sense. I have to say, if I don't actively dislike a book or something about the book or what the author's done in the book, I do find it a lot more difficult to say and commit to having DNF'd it, and I think that's what this shelf is revealing to me, because I want to say I'm probably not going to finish The Man in the High Castle, but I feel guilty because it's not a bad book and it was really interesting. I'm really sorry. I also have Homer's Odyssey on here, but this is actually a put down for the time being of a reread I was doing, and I'd like to go back and finish my reread, but I'd probably just reread from the beginning again, because why pick up a reread halfway through, if that makes sense? Why not just reread from the beginning? The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I will finish this one. This is another book that I started reading this when I was in a massive reading slump before I started booktubing, and obviously never finished it. This is back in the early years of university when I essentially read nothing apart from uni work, after having been a very avid reader as a child. The end of high school and the beginning of university just completely threw me off, and I started this in that time when I think I probably DNF'd quite a few books because I just never got into anything. So I will return to this because I want to read more of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's non-Sherlock Holmes work, but I will, again, this will be another one I will start from the beginning because it's been years, so it's not a put down, it's a haven't read, need to read. I think I'll leave this video here, it's probably long enough. I hope you found this vaguely interesting. Let me know if you are somebody that powers through to the end of books or puts them down when they're not enjoying them, or if you're like me occasionally and puts books down for months, if not years, with the grand intention of returning to them, and it just not happening for a very long time. Let me know so I can feel a little bit less alone, and if you feel compelled to convince me to pick up any of these books in the near future, then have at it. Until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!